I knew something was wrong the second I saw my front door slightly open. I always lock it. Always. It wasn't just a habit, it was routine, the kind you build over years without thinking. So when I pulled into my driveway and noticed the door wasn't fully closed, just barely cracked like someone had pushed it open and didn't bother to shut it properly, I stopped before even getting out of the car. And for a moment, I just sat there, watching. Because something about it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt intentional. I stepped out slowly, closing the car door without slamming it, listening carefully as I walked up the path. The house was quiet, no obvious noise, no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, nothing chaotic. But that didn't make it better, it made it worse, because it meant whoever went inside didn't need to break anything to get in. I pushed the door open gently and stepped inside, and that's when I heard it. Movement, not subtle, not quiet, drawers opening, something being moved. Someone walking around like they belonged there. I didn't raise my voice right away. I just stepped further into the living room and said, calm and controlled, "Can I help you?" The movement stopped instantly. Then, from the hallway, she appeared, clipboard in hand, phone in the other, walking out like she had every right to be there. "Oh, good, you're back," she said, like she'd been waiting for me. For a second, I didn't even respond, because my brain was still catching up to what I was seeing. A stranger, inside my house, acting like this was normal. "Who are you?" I asked. "I'm with the HOA," she replied immediately. "We're conducting a compliance inspection." I stared at her for a second. "You broke into my house," I said. "No," she corrected, shaking her head slightly. "We accessed the property for an inspection. That's within our authority." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how confident she sounded. "You don't have authority to enter my home," I said. "We do if there are violations," she replied, already glancing back down at her clipboard. "And based on multiple reports, there are." That's when I stepped fully into the room. "No," I said, firmer now. "You don't." She didn't back down, didn't hesitate, didn't even look concerned. Instead, she tapped her pen against the paper and said, "Your exterior modifications are non-compliant, and we've had complaints about unauthorized changes. This inspection is necessary." I looked around my own house for a second, then back at her. "You're inside," I said. "This is not an exterior inspection." She waved that off like it didn't matter. "We need to verify full compliance," she said. "Interior conditions can affect community standards." That was the moment it stopped being ridiculous and started being serious. Because now it wasn't just overreach, it was trespassing. "Put the clipboard down," I said. That got her attention, not fear, but irritation. "Sir, you're interfering with an official process," she said. I took another step forward. "You are in my house without permission," I replied. "That's not a process. That's a problem." She straightened slightly, like she was preparing for confrontation instead of avoiding it. "If you continue to resist, I'll have to escalate this," she said. I nodded once. "Do that." That wasn't the response she expected. At all. "You're refusing to cooperate?" she asked. "I'm telling you to leave," I said. She stared at me for a second, then pulled out her phone. "Fine," she said. "We'll handle this properly." I already knew what that meant. "Still," I asked. "Properly how?" She looked up while dialing. "I'm calling the police." There it was. The same move. Confidence backed by assumption. I didn't try to stop her, didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, in my own living room, while someone who had broken into my house called the police on me. She spoke clearly on the phone, describing the situation like I was the problem, like I was obstructing something legitimate, like she had every right to be standing where she was. She didn't mention entering without permission, didn't mention being inside already, just selective details, confidently delivered. When she hung up, she looked at me like she had already won. "They're on their way," she said. I nodded slightly. "Good," I replied. That word again. Good. Because now this wasn't just her claim anymore. It was about to become something else, something real. We stood there in silence for a few minutes. She continued making notes like nothing was wrong, occasionally glancing around the house as if she was still conducting an inspection. I didn't move. I didn't stop her. I just waited. Then we heard it. Sirens, getting closer. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled into the driveway, followed by another. Doors opened, footsteps approached, and a knock came at the already open door. Two officers stepped inside, immediately taking in the scene. One homeowner, one uninvited inspector, and tension thick enough to feel. "What's going on here?" one of them asked. She stepped forward immediately. "I'm with the HOA," she said. "He's refusing a compliance inspection and interfering with enforcement." The officer looked at me. "Sir," I kept it simple. "She entered my home without permission," I said. That changed the air slightly. The officer turned back to her. "Ma'am, is that true?" She didn't hesitate. "We have authority to inspect properties under HOA regulations," she said. I almost smiled, because now she had just said it out loud, clearly, confidently, on record, and she had no idea who she was saying it in front of. The officer looked between us, still neutral, still assessing. "Do you have documentation authorizing entry?" he asked. She hesitated, just for a second, then said, "It's part of our enforcement rights." "That's not what I asked," he replied. Silence. Then I finally spoke again, calm, controlled, precise. "No HOA has the right to enter a private residence without consent," I said. The officer nodded slightly. "That's generally correct," he said. She stepped in quickly. "He's misrepresenting the situation," she said. "This is a legal inspection." That's when I reached into my jacket. Not quickly, not dramatically, just steady, and pulled out my ID. "I think," I said, holding it up, "we should be very clear about what's legal." The officers looked at it, then looked again. And just like that, everything changed. The moment the officers looked at the ID, the entire atmosphere shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, controlled, but unmistakable. One of them leaned slightly closer, reading carefully, while the other straightened just a bit, like instinct kicked in before thought did. They didn't rush, they didn't react emotionally, but the recognition was there, clear, immediate, real. The first officer handed it back with both hands, a subtle sign of respect that hadn't been there before. "Understood, Your Honor," he said. That one phrase landed harder than anything else in the room, because now this wasn't a disagreement. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't even an HOA issue anymore. It was something else entirely. I nodded once and put the ID away without making a show of it. "I'd like to understand," I said calmly, "under what authority she believes she can enter a private residence without consent." The officers didn't answer right away. Instead, they turned toward her, and this time, their tone was different. "Ma'am," the second officer said, "we're going to need you to explain how you entered this property." For the first time since I walked in, she hesitated. Not long, but enough. "I told you," she said, trying to hold on to her earlier confidence. "It's a compliance inspection." "That's not authorization to enter a home," the officer replied. She shifted slightly, her grip tightening on the clipboard. "We have enforcement rights," she insisted. "Residents are required to comply." I spoke again, still calm, still controlled. "I'm not a member of your HOA," I said. "Even if I were, that wouldn't grant you access to the interior of my home." The first officer nodded slightly. "He's correct," he said. That was the first crack, a visible one, because now she wasn't just being challenged, she was being corrected, officially. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said quickly. "We've conducted inspections before." "Inside occupied homes?" the officer asked. She didn't answer, because she couldn't, and everyone in that room knew it. The silence stretched just long enough to make the point on its own. "You need to step outside," the officer said. That landed, hard, because just minutes ago, she had been walking through my house like she owned it. Now she was being told to leave it. She didn't move immediately. "I'm not the one in the wrong here," she said, her voice tightening. The second officer took a small step forward. "Ma'am," he said, firmer now, "you entered a private residence without permission. We need you to step outside while we sort this out." That was it. That was the moment control slipped completely. She looked at me, like she expected me to say something, to argue, to soften the situation, to meet her halfway. I didn't. I just stood there, watching, waiting. Because this wasn't my situation to fix. It was hers. After a few seconds, she turned and walked toward the door, slower than before. Her posture no longer confident, no longer certain, just controlled enough to hold itself together. Once she stepped outside, the officers followed, leaving me alone in the house for a moment. I didn't move right away. I just looked around, at the drawers she had opened, the things she had touched, the space she had walked through like it didn't belong to anyone else. Then I stepped outside. They were standing near the porch now, the conversation already continuing, but quieter, more serious. "I was acting within HOA authority," she was saying. "You don't have authority to enter a home without consent," the officer replied. We enforce community standards, she insisted. Not like this, he said. I stepped down onto the path, close enough to hear everything clearly. This is a misunderstanding, she added quickly, trying to pull it back. No, I said calmly. It isn't. They both looked at me. I didn't raise my voice, didn't change my tone, but I didn't soften it either. This is trespassing, I said. That word hung in the air. Heavy, final. Because once you say it, everything changes. She shook her head immediately. That's not what this is. It is, I replied. The first officer nodded slightly. At minimum, this is unlawful entry, he said. There it was, spoken out loud, official, documented, real. Her expression changed again, not dramatically, but enough to show she understood the weight of what was happening now. This doesn't need to go that far, she said. That was new. Minutes ago, she had been calling the police like she was in control. Now, she was trying to limit the damage. That depends, I said. The officers exchanged a brief glance, then one of them spoke carefully. Sir, he said to me, how would you like to proceed? That question mattered, because now the situation had shifted completely. The control she thought she had was gone. And the next step was mine. I looked at her for a moment. At the clipboard she wasn't holding as tightly anymore. At the confidence that had drained out of her posture. At the realization slowly setting in. Then I said something simple. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. She nodded quickly. Of course, she said. It won't. But the officers didn't move on right away, because they weren't done. Ma'am, one of them said, we're going to need your full name and HOA affiliation. That's when the final shift started, because now this wasn't just a mistake. It was being recorded, and she knew it. She gave the information, slower than before, more carefully, like every word mattered now. Because it did. And as that moment settled, as the reality of what had just happened fully landed, there was only one thing left. Consequences. Once her information was written down, the situation didn't end. It changed completely. The officers stepped aside briefly, speaking to each other in low voices, the kind of quiet, deliberate conversation that means a decision is being made, not just discussed. She stood a few feet away, no longer speaking, no longer directing anything, just waiting. For the first time since I had walked into my own house and found her inside, she had nothing to say. After a moment, one of the officers turned back toward us. His tone was still professional, but there was a weight to it now that hadn't been there before. Ma'am, he said, entering a private residence without permission is a serious matter. Based on what we've established, this goes beyond an HOA dispute. She swallowed slightly. I understand, she said, her voice quieter now. That word again. Understand. But it came too late. This will need to be documented as an unlawful entry, he continued. Any further action may be determined after review. She nodded quickly. Of course. That was the moment it fully hit her. Not when I told her to leave, not when the officers questioned her, but now, when it became official. Because once something is documented, it doesn't just disappear. I stepped forward slightly, keeping my tone steady. You entered my home without consent, I said. You represented that you had legal authority when you didn't. She didn't argue, didn't interrupt, didn't correct. She just listened, because there was nothing left to push against. I'm not interested in escalation, I continued, but I am interested in making sure this doesn't happen again, not to me, not to anyone else. She nodded again, more firmly this time. It won't, she said. The officers remained where they were, watching, making sure the situation stayed exactly where it needed to be, controlled, clear, finished. Good, I said. That was it. No raised voices, no dramatic ending, just a line drawn where it should have been from the beginning. The officers wrapped up the report, took a few final notes, and then turned toward me. If anything further comes from this, one of them said, you'll be informed. I nodded. Thank you. They gave a brief acknowledgement, and then headed back toward their vehicles, leaving the driveway quiet again. She stood there for another second, then two, like she was deciding whether to say something else, something to recover even a small piece of what had just happened. But there was nothing left. No angle, no argument, no control. Without another word, she turned and walked away. And just like that, it was over. Or at least it was for me. A few days later, I received a letter, not from her, from the HOA. Formal, carefully worded, acknowledging an incident, clarifying their policies, and stating that they do not authorize entry into private residences under any circumstances without consent. In other words, They were correcting her, publicly, even if they didn't say her name. That same week, I heard from a neighbor that there had been an internal meeting, closed, private, and by the end of it, she wasn't part of the board anymore. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. Because even organizations built on rules understand one thing. If you cross a legal line, it stops being enforcement. It becomes liability. As for my house, everything went back to normal. The door stayed locked. The rooms stayed undisturbed. The space felt like mine again, fully, completely, the way it should have been all along. But every now and then, I'd think back to that moment. Walking in, seeing someone inside who didn't belong there, hearing them claim authority that didn't exist. Because the truth is, it wasn't about who I was. It was about what she did. Anyone has the right to feel safe in their own home. Anyone has the right to say no. And anyone who thinks a title, a position, or a clipboard gives them the right to cross that line eventually learns the same thing she did. Some doors you don't get to open. How did you like the story? Please comment and like, subscribe, and share my YouTube channel for more HOA interesting stories.